Imagine a world where life hung by a thread, where every dawn was a gamble and every sunset brought new fears. What would it be like to live in 570, at a time when empires clashed, disease stalked the land, and the raw forces of nature ruled supreme? How many mothers, across vast deserts and ancient cities, whispered desperate prayers for their little ones, only to have them snatched away by cruel fate? Number 10. The whispering sands of the Hijaz. The sun beat down on the Hijaz, a relentless burning eye in the heavens. Amina, her hands calloused from grinding grain and weaving rough camel hair, watched her 2-year-old son, Tariq, chase a lone lizard across the packed earth of their small courtyard. His laughter, a clear, sweet sound, was the music of her barren world, a stark contrast to the parched landscape that surrounded their humble dwelling on the outskirts of Mecca. It was 570, a year that would be etched into the memory of countless souls for reasons known and unknown. A year where life was both precious and utterly fragile. Amina remembered the day Tariq was born, amidst the scent of frankincense and the quiet murmurs of the women. He had been a robust baby, filling their small home with his cries, then his gurgles, and finally his joyful babble. Her husband, Salim, a caravaneer whose journeys often took him far into the desolate wilderness, would always return with small trinkets for his boy: a polished stone, a desert flower pressed between parchment, a story of distant markets. Tariq was the light of their lives, their hope in a world often overshadowed by tribal feuds and the scarcity of water. Amina often thought of the stories of hardship passed down through generations, how her own grandmother had lost 3 infants to the fever of the desert, a terrifying ailment that claimed the youngest and most vulnerable. She prayed daily, offering small sacrifices to the idols of their ancestors, hoping to appease any spirits that might bring such sorrow to her door. But the desert, though beautiful in its vastness, was also a harsh mistress. Its hidden dangers lurked in the shimmering heat haze, in the bite of an unseen scorpion, or in the insidious creep of disease that could fell a child in mere days. Tariq, so vibrant just a few sunrises ago, had woken one morning with a cough, a small innocent sound that Amina had initially dismissed as a cold. He had played less vigorously that day, his eyes a little duller, his laughter a little softer. By midday, a burning heat radiated from his small body. Amina, her heart seizing with a primal fear, had pressed her lips to his forehead. It was hot, far too hot. She remembered the stories her mother told her about such fevers, tales of children wilting like desert blossoms, their breath growing shallow, their skin turning ashen. She had brewed bitter herbs, remedies passed down through generations of women, knowledge gleaned from the scant wisdom of their ancestors about the medicinal properties of desert plants. She had rubbed cool oils on his burning skin, sung him lullabies, and told him stories of brave warriors and beautiful oases, hoping to distract him from his discomfort. Salim, having just returned from a short journey to Taif, had looked at his son with concern etched deep in his brow, his strong hands feeling Tariq's feverish skin. He had called upon a wise old woman from their tribe, a woman known for her ancient healing knowledge, who had examined Tariq with solemn eyes. She had prepared a potion of strange roots and whispered incantations over him, her face grim. "The desert heat has settled in his bones," she had declared, her voice heavy with an unspoken truth that made Amina's blood run cold. "We must pray." Days blurred into a nightmare of sleepless nights and anxious days. Tariq's breathing grew labored, each small gasp a dagger to Amina's soul. He no longer chased lizards. He no longer laughed. He barely stirred his small body, a mere whisper beneath the thin blanket. Amina sat by his side, her tears a constant stream, her voice hoarse from endless pleading. She remembered the stories from other families in Mecca, how illness often swept through the narrow alleys, taking young lives indiscriminately. Some scholars today, looking back at such periods, suggest that many of these unexplained fevers were likely various forms of dysentery, measles, or other infectious diseases, for which ancient peoples had no true understanding or cure beyond rudimentary herbal remedies and fervent prayers. The lack of clean water sources in crowded settlements, coupled with limited medical knowledge, made children particularly susceptible. On the third night, as the crescent moon hung like a silver scythe in the vast inky sky, Tariq's small body convulsed. Amina shrieked, clutching him close, rocking him desperately. Salim, his face a mask of grief, held her, his own tears mingling with hers. The old woman, who had remained with them, bowed her head, her silence a profound pronouncement of defeat, a final shallow breath, a moment of stillness. And then the silence, thick and suffocating, descended upon their home. Tariq was gone. His small chest, which had risen and fallen with such vigor just days before, was now still. Amina cradled her son's lifeless body, his skin strangely cool, a stark contrast to the burning heat that had consumed him. His little hand, which had so recently clutched her finger with surprising strength, was now limp. The scent of frankincense, once a symbol of his birth, now mingled with the bitter smell of death. The sun rose indifferent to their sorrow, casting long shadows across the courtyard where Tariq had played. The lizard, perhaps the same one, darted across the packed earth, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded. Amina sat numb, the emptiness in her arms a gaping wound. The desert wind, which had once seemed to whisper lullabies, now carried only the desolate echo of her shattered heart. The vast indifferent sands stretched out to the horizon, bearing witness to another small life lost to the relentless realities of 570. Number 9. The shadowed walls of Constantinople. The chill of the Golden Horn always seemed to seep into Ilara's bones, even within the thick stone walls of their small apartment in Constantinople. It was 570, and the city, a vibrant tapestry of commerce, faith, and political intrigue, often felt like a grand stage where life and death played out their ancient drama. Ilara's husband, Theodosius, was a scribe in the imperial chancellery, a man of letters whose days were spent translating ancient texts and drafting decrees for Emperor Justinian. Their lives were comfortable, yet precarious, like so many in the vast Byzantine Empire. Their greatest treasure was their daughter, 8-year-old Lyra, a child with eyes the color of the Aegean Sea and a spirit as bright as the mosaics in the Hagia Sophia. Lyra was an unusual child, full of questions and an insatiable curiosity. She loved to listen to her father read from scrolls, her small finger tracing the elegant Greek letters. Lyra often found her sketching in the dust with a twig, drawing figures that vaguely resembled the saints in the churches or the bustling ships in the harbor. She was a beacon of joy in their small, quiet home, a constant reminder of the blessings bestowed upon them. Lyra remembered the stories of the terrifying plague of Justinian that had swept through the city decades earlier, decimating the population. Though that particular scourge had passed, lingering pockets of illness or new, equally virulent diseases were a constant threat in the densely populated urban centers of the Byzantine Empire. Life in the city was never truly secure. One bleak autumn morning, the usual chill that permeated the city streets felt heavier, colder. Lyra awoke with a slight cough, a dry, persistent tickle in her throat. Lyra, ever vigilant, had prepared her a warm honeyed drink, dismissing it as a common cold. But by dusk, Lyra's breath was shallow and rapid, her small body racked with a fever that pulsed visibly beneath her pale skin. Her eyes, usually so bright, were clouded with a glassy film, her small voice reduced to a thin, reedy whisper. Lyra, her heart pounding with a dread she refused to name, knew this was more than a simple ailment. The illness seemed to descend with terrifying swiftness, like a sudden, brutal storm over the Bosphorus. Theodosius, upon returning from his day's work, rushed to his daughter's side, his scholarly composure crumbling as he saw her labored breathing. They sent for the physician, a man named Ioannis, who was renowned for his knowledge of Galen and Hippocrates. Ioannis, a stoic man with a kind, weary face, examined Lyra with grave concern. He prescribed various poultices and a bitter concoction of herbs. His brow furrowed. "It is a wasting sickness," he said, his voice low. "A common term for illnesses that caused rapid decline and weakness. A fever that consumes the inner fire." He mentioned that several other children in their district had also succumbed to similar symptoms in recent weeks, suggesting a localized epidemic. Ancient medical understanding, though advanced for its time, still grappled with the true nature of contagion, often attributing illnesses to imbalances of humors or miasmas, rather than microscopic organisms. For 3 harrowing days and nights, Alara never left Lyra's side. She held her hand, stroked her forehead, whispered prayers to the Theotokos, and pleaded with God for a miracle. The vibrant life that had once filled their home seemed to drain away, replaced by the hushed whispers of grief and the agonizing rhythm of Lyra's struggling breaths. Theodosius, usually immersed in his scrolls, sat nearby, his face etched with unspeakable sorrow, his hand clenching a small crucifix. The sounds of the bustling city outside, the cries of vendors, the clatter of carts, the ringing of church bells seemed distant and irrelevant, their lives now confined to the small, suffocating chamber of their daughter's illness. On the dawn of the 4th day, as the first golden rays of sunlight pierced the narrow window and illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, Lyra's breathing stopped. There was no final gasp, no dramatic struggle, just a quiet cessation. A gentle fading. Her small hand, which Alara still held, went cold. Her eyes, which had been so full of light, were now fixed, staring into an unseen distance. Alara screamed, a raw, primal sound that tore from the deepest part of her soul, echoing off the cold stone walls. She clutched Lyra's lifeless body to her chest, rocking her back and forth, desperate to coax back the warmth, the breath, the life that had been so cruelly stolen. Theodosius knelt beside them, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The sun rose higher, painting the ancient city in shades of gold, but for Alara, the world had turned to ash. The vibrant mosaics of the Hagia Sophia, the bustling harbors, the emperor's grand palace, all seemed hollow and meaningless without Lyra's laughter echoing in their home. The chilling knowledge that so many others in that year of 570 odded had faced similar fates, losing children to the unseen predators of disease, offered no comfort. Merely amplified the terrifying randomness of existence in a world where a child's life could be extinguished with the whisper of a breath, leaving only the profound, aching emptiness behind the shadowed walls of Constantinople. Number 8. The desperate flight through Lombardy. Anya held her son Niklos so tightly that his small body was almost swallowed by her embrace. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, but also with the metallic tang of fear. It was 570, and the jagged peaks of the Julian Alps loomed behind them, stark against the bruised sky. They were on the run, part of a small, terrified band of Romanized villagers fleeing the relentless advance of the Lombards, a Germanic people who had descended upon Italy like a hungry tide. For Anya, a woman whose life had once been defined by the peaceful rhythm of the harvest in her small stone-walled village near Aquileia, the year 570 had marked not just a new calendar cycle but a brutal, terrifying rupture in her existence. Miklos was only 3 years old, a curious, energetic boy with dark, bright eyes that missed nothing. He had spent his early childhood exploring the meadows, chasing butterflies, and listening to the rustle of the wind through the olive groves. Anya, A young widow whose husband had been lost to a raiding party months before, had poured all her love and hope into this child. He was her reason for living, her anchor in a world that felt increasingly unstable. She remembered stories from her grandmother, tales of Roman citizens fleeing Visigoths and Huns, but she had always believed such horrors were a distant past now. They were her present. Historical records of this period confirm the widespread disruption and displacement caused by the Lombard invasion of Italy, which began in earnest around 568 AD. Villages were sacked, populations scattered, and the fabric of Roman provincial life was irrevocably altered. The journey had been arduous, a seemingly endless trek through dense forests and treacherous mountain passes. Their small group, comprised mostly of women, children, and elderly men, tried to keep to the shadows, avoiding main roads where Lombard scouts might spot them. Food was scarce, water even more so. Each day was a desperate struggle for survival, marked by hunger pangs and the constant gnawing fear of discovery. Miklos, usually so full of boundless energy, had grown quiet, his small face pale and drawn. He had clutched Anya's hand fiercely, his innocent eyes mirroring her own anxieties. Anya would sing him hushed lullabies, ancient folk songs about brave travelers and safe havens, trying to keep his spirits up, trying to keep her own from breaking. One particularly cold, damp morning, as they made their way through a dense, fog-shrouded valley, Miklos began to shiver violently. His skin felt clammy and cold, despite Anya wrapping him in her shawl and pressing him against her chest. He coughed. A deep rattling sound that tore through her heart, a low moan escaped his lips. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Anya. She had seen this before. It was the cough of the swamps, a term the villagers used for the chilling illness that often swept through low-lying areas, especially in the cold, damp months. It stole the breath slowly, agonizingly. The lack of proper shelter, insufficient food, and the constant exposure to the elements made them all terribly vulnerable. The elderly woman leading their group, a stoic matron named Lena, recognized the symptoms immediately. Her eyes, filled with pity and grim resignation, met Anya's. "He needs warmth," she whispered, "and rest. Things we cannot give him here." They tried to move faster, desperate to find some form of shelter, a cave, anything that might offer a respite from the biting cold and the pervasive dampness. The path was unforgiving, muddy and slick, and every step was a battle. Anya felt Miklos's small body grow heavier in her arms, his breathing becoming increasingly shallow, punctuated by a terrifying wheeze. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows, they finally stumbled upon a small, derelict shepherd's hut. It was barely more than a stone shell, but it offered a semblance of shelter. Anya carefully laid Miklos down on the hard, cold earth floor, wrapping him in every scrap of clothing she had. She held him close, trying to transfer her own diminishing warmth to him. He was barely conscious now, his eyes fluttering, his breath coming in ragged gasps. She whispered his name, again and again, pleading with him to hold on, to fight. She remembered the warmth of his hand in hers, the way he would laugh when she tickled him, the simple joy he brought into her life now. The coldness of his skin was an unbearable truth. Hours passed in a terrifying vigil. The other women huddled in silence, their faces etched with sympathy and their own quiet anxieties. They knew, as Anya knew in the deepest part of her being, that there was nothing more they could do. The world outside, a world of war and displacement, had claimed her husband, and now it was reaching for her son. Historical accounts of such migrations often describe the high mortality rates, especially among children and the elderly, due to exposure, starvation, and disease. The wasting sickness, or cough of the swamps, would have been a common and devastating threat. Just before dawn, as the first faint hint of gray light appeared through the hut's broken doorway, Mikos's small chest ceased to rise. His last breath was so shallow, so quiet, that Anya almost missed it. His hand, which had held hers for so long, released its grip. The small, vibrant life that had been her reason for survival, her sole purpose, was gone. The hut was filled with the sound of Anya's desperate wails, a raw, animalistic cry that echoed the desolate silence of the mountains. She cradled his lifeless body, rocking him gently, tears streaming down her face, mingling with the mud and grime on her cheeks. The bitter cold of the Lombardy morning permeated the hut, and for Anya it felt as though the very warmth had been ripped from the world. Her desperate flight had ended not in safety, but in the most profound and solitary grief, in the relentless year of 570. Number 7. The unforgiving plains of Francia. Alara's hands, rough from working the soil, trembled as she scooped a handful of pale, sickly grain into a small bowl. Was 570, at a year of biting cold and relentless hunger, across much of Francia, the burgeoning Merovingian kingdom. Their small village, nestled by a winding river that was usually bountiful, had seen its crops wither under an unseasonably harsh winter, and a spring that brought too much rain, then too little. For Ilara, a young mother who had just celebrated her daughter Brigid's 5th birthday, the scarcity of food was a constant gnawing anxiety, a shadow that clung to every waking moment. Brigid was a sprite of a girl, with hair like spun flax, and a laugh that sounded like the tinkling of small bells. She was often seen skipping through the sparse fields, her imagination turning withered stalks into grand castles and pebbles into gleaming jewels. Alara and her husband Finn, a farmer whose strong back was now bent with worry, had always considered Brigid their greatest blessing. They remembered the stories from their elders about past famines, times when the earth refused to yield and the village graves grew steadily. They had always prayed it would not be their fate, but the signs in the year 570 were ominous. Historical accounts from this period, particularly in Western Europe, frequently describe periods of agricultural hardship and localized famines, often exacerbated by political instability and primitive farming techniques. The lean times had begun subtly. First, the loaves of bread grew smaller, then thinner. The stew pots held more water, then vegetables. Soon, the only meals were meager portions of boiled roots or whatever wild greens could be scrounged from the forest floor. Brigid, usually so full of energy, began to tire easily. Her bright eyes lost their sparkle, replaced by a dull, unfocused gaze. Her small frame, once plump and healthy, grew alarmingly thin, her ribs visible beneath her threadbare tunic. Alara watched her daughter's decline with a terror that clawed at her throat. She tried to coax Brigid to eat, offering her the choicest, albeit still pitifully small portions of their meager rations. But Brigid often turned her head away, her appetite gone. The village elder, a man named Gareth, a grizzled farmer who had seen many harsh seasons, spoke of the hunger sickness, a slow, insidious consumption of the body from within. He advised them to pray, to fast, to seek the blessings of the local saints. But his eyes held no hope, only grim understanding. He had seen too many children succumb to the same fate. Scholars studying this period often refer to the effects of malnutrition, where children especially are susceptible to various deficiency diseases and a weakened immune system, making them vulnerable to common infections that a healthy child might easily overcome. In essence, it was not always just starvation directly, but the body's inability to fight off illness due to prolonged malnourishment. Days stretched into weeks, each one a testament to their suffering. Ilara held Brigid whenever she could, trying to warm her, trying to soothe her incessant cries for more that she could not provide. The village, usually bustling with life, was quiet, haunted by the hollow coughs of the sick and the constant hum of hunger. Finn, desperate, would spend entire days in the forest, returning with nothing but a few meager berries or a starved rabbit, barely enough to sustain one person, let alone a family. He grew gaunt himself, his strength waning, his spirit broken. One bitterly cold afternoon, as a thin, icy rain began to fall, Bridget became unresponsive. Her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. Her small hand, which had once grasped Alara's finger with surprising strength, was now limp and cold. Alara, her own body weakened by hunger, frantically rubbed Bridget's arms and legs, desperately trying to bring back some warmth, some sign of life. Finn knelt beside them, his face buried in his hands, his silent sobs shaking his emaciated frame. The flickering oil lamp cast long, grotesque shadows across the small, cheerless hovel as the last sliver of daylight faded. Bridget's breathing stopped. There was no final gasp, no dramatic struggle, just a quiet, horrifying stillness. Her small, fragile body lay motionless in Alara's arms, a testament to the brutal, unforgiving grip of famine. Alara's scream was a raw, guttural sound, filled with a grief so profound it seemed to tear the very air. She clutched Bridget to her chest, rocking back and forth, desperate to deny the reality of her loss. Her tears, cold and endless, mingled with the rain that now dripped through a crack in their roof. The silence that followed was broken only by Finn's muffled cries. The village, already shrouded in the gloom of hunger, now felt a deeper, colder despair. For Alara, the world had lost its color, its purpose. The barren plains outside their hovel seemed to stretch into an equally barren future. The year 570 would forever be etched in her memory not just as a time of hunger, but as the year the earth and fate had conspired to steal her precious Bridget, leaving her with nothing but the echo of an empty laugh and the chilling knowledge that some battles, like the relentless grip of hunger, could never be won. Number 6. The unseen hunter of the Anglo-Saxon moors. The biting wind swept across the desolate moorland, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the distant bleating of sheep. Ethel, her cloak pulled tightly around her, watched her 6-year-old son Bran chase a flock of startled starlings. His wild, tangled hair, the color of heather in summer, bounced as he ran, his laughter carried away by the wind. It was 570, at a time when the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were still coalescing in Britain, a land of deep forests, misty moors, and scattered settlements. Life was hard marked by the rhythms of farming, the constant threat of rival tribes, and the unpredictable whims of nature. For Ethel, the wife of a simple farmer named Cynric Bran, was their only child, a vibrant spark of joy in a challenging world. Bran was a curious boy, always exploring, always asking questions about the trees, the birds, the shifting patterns of the clouds. Ethel would often find him by the stream, trying to catch fish with his bare hands, or mimicking the call of a hawk. He was their future, their hope, a sturdy sprout in the often harsh soil of their existence. Ethel remembered the old stories, tales of children snatched by wolves or lost in the dense, fog-ridden moors. She always kept a close eye on Bran, a fear gnawing at her heart, a fear born of the unpredictable wildness of their world. Historical evidence suggests that infant and child mortality rates were extremely high in Anglo-Saxon England, with many succumbing to illness, accidents, or the harsh environment. Life expectancy was significantly lower than today. One crisp, late autumn afternoon, as the days grew shorter and the air sharper, Bran returned from a solitary exploration of the moors, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet fatigue. His clothes were damp, and a persistent shiver ran through his small body. Ethel, her heart sinking, felt his forehead. It was warm, but not burning. She dismissed it as a chill, a common ailment from playing outside. She brewed him a warm herbal tea, remedies passed down through generations of women, hoping to ward off any deeper illness. She wrapped him in a thick woolen blanket, sitting him by the meager fire in their wattle and daub hut, But the next morning Bran was worse. His breathing was labored, a shallow, rapid panting and a high-pitched wheeze accompanied each gasp. His small body felt terribly hot to the touch, and his eyes, usually so bright, were clouded with a glassy film. He spoke in whispers, his voice thin and reedy. Aethel knew with a sickening certainty that this was not just a chill. It was the coldness of the lungs, a phrase the old women used for the illness that stole breath. She had seen it claim the children of neighboring families, a terrifying silent predator that seemed to rise from the damp, cold earth itself. She remembered the stories of how easily children could succumb to illness in this harsh land, how little understanding they truly had of the diseases that ravaged their communities. Cynric, his strong hands trembling, had tried to help. He had brought an elder from the village, a wise woman, who knew the old ways and the properties of herbs. She had prepared a potion of steaming leaves and roots, rubbing a pungent salve on Bran's chest. But her face was grim, her words few. "The unseen hunter has found him," she had whispered to Aethel, a grim prophecy that made Aethel's blood run cold. She had seen the hopelessness in the wise woman's eyes. Scholars today might identify such symptoms as severe pneumonia or bronchitis, common respiratory infections that were often fatal in a pre-antibiotic era, especially for children with compromised immune systems due to poor nutrition or constant exposure. Aethel spent the next 2 days and nights in a waking nightmare, clutching Bran to her chest, trying to infuse him with her own life force. She sang him lullabies, ancient songs about heroes and mythical beasts, her voice hoarse from endless pleading. She whispered his name again and again, begging him to open his eyes to speak to her, to fight the unseen enemy that was slowly consuming him. The flickering firelight cast dancing shadows on the walls of their hut, mirroring the frantic dance of despair in Aethel's heart. The distant howl of a wolf only deepened the sense of wild, untamed dread that surrounded them. As the sun began to paint the eastern sky with faint streaks of gray, Bran's breathing grew quieter, shallower, until it was nothing more than a faint whisper against Aethel's ear. Then, even that whisper ceased. His small body, once vibrant and full of life, went still and cold in her arms. His eyes, fixed on some distant point, held no light. Aethel let out a choked cry, a sound of profound anguish that seemed to echo across the desolate moorland. She rocked him back and forth, her tears falling onto his still face, desperate to warm him, to bring him back, to undo the cruel hand of fate. Cynric knelt beside her, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs, his strong hands reaching out to comfort her, but finding no solace themselves. The moorland wind howled outside their small hut, a mournful lament for the life that had been extinguished for Aethel. The world had become a bleak, empty canvas. The laughter of starlings, the rustle of heather, all the sounds of the moor that had once brought joy, now brought only a profound, aching silence. The year 570 would forever be etched in her memory as the year the unseen hunter had stalked their home, claiming her beloved Bran and leaving her with nothing but the chilling coldness of an empty embrace. Number 5. The river's embrace in Visigothic Iberia. The afternoon sun, warm and golden, dappled through the olive trees, casting shifting patterns on the banks of the Tagus River. Isabella, her simple linen dress clinging to her, watched her 4-year-old daughter Sophia play by the water's edge. Sophia, a lively child with a mop of dark curls and eyes as bright as polished stones, was fascinated by the small, smooth pebbles she found in the riverbed. It was 570, at a time of relative peace in this corner of Visigothic Iberia, though the shadow of war and political intrigue was never far from the kingdom's borders. For Isabella, a farmer's wife whose days were filled with the rhythm of the seasons, Sophia was the very heart of her world, a constant source of joy and wonder. Sophia was an inquisitive child, always exploring, always finding new delights in the simplest things. She loved to help her mother gather herbs, her small fingers carefully plucking the leaves, and she would often narrate grand adventures to her dolls made of twisted straw. Isabella and her husband, Matteo, had waited many years for a child, and Sophia's arrival had brought a profound sense of completeness to their lives. Isabella often recounted stories of children lost to accidents, particularly near water, a constant fear in their rural community where rivers and wells were vital but perilous. She always kept a watchful eye on Sophia, her heart quickening whenever the girl ventured too close to the river's deceptively calm surface. One sunny afternoon, Isabella was distracted. A neighbor, burdened with a sick child, had come to their small farm seeking Isabella's knowledge of medicinal herbs. Isabella, always generous with her time and compassion, had spent a few hurried moments mixing a poultice, her attention divided between her neighbor's urgent plea and the playful sounds of Sophia near the river. She called out to Sophia, "Stay close, my little sparrow, do not stray." And Sophia, momentarily, had chirped back a cheerful "See, Mama." The gentle murmur of the river, the rustle of leaves, and the low voices of the women created a tranquil scene, masking the lurking danger. A few minutes later, as Isabella returned to the riverbank, her heart leaped into her throat. The vibrant splash of color that was Sophia's small tunic was gone. The pebbles she had been collecting lay scattered undisturbed. A chilling silence had descended upon the familiar scene. "Sophia," Isabella called out, her voice trembling, a cold dread washing over her. She ran to the water's edge, her eyes scanning the calm surface, then the reeds that lined the bank. Her mind screamed. She remembered the stories, the warnings, the swift and unforgiving nature of the river. Accounts from ancient and medieval times often described drownings as a common tragedy, especially for children who lived in close proximity to rivers, lakes, or wells, as safety measures were non-existent. Matteo, working in the fields nearby, heard Isabella's desperate rising cries. He dropped his hoe and sprinted towards the river, his own face contorted with dawning terror. Together, they searched frantically, their eyes darting over every ripple, every shadow in the water. Isabella, tears streaming down her face, plunged into the cold current, oblivious to its bite, her hands groping blindly beneath the surface. Matteo joined her, their desperate search becoming a frantic dance against time. The river, which had always been a source of life and sustenance, now felt like a vast indifferent entity holding their precious child captive. Minutes stretched into an eternity of agonizing horror. The sun, which had been so warm, now felt like a mocking presence. Then Matteo cried out, a raw, despairing sound. He had found her. Sophia's small, lifeless body was caught amongst some reeds, just beneath the surface, her dark curls fanned out like seaweed. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, as if she were merely sleeping. But the telltale stillness, the eerie lightness of her form spoke of an irreversible truth. The river had claimed her. Isabella stumbled forward, her legs giving out, and clutched her daughter's cold, damp body to her chest. Her wails ripped through the tranquil afternoon, echoing through the olive groves. She rocked Sophia back and forth, pressing kisses to her cold forehead, whispering desperate pleas for her to wake up, to breathe, to laugh again. Matteo knelt beside her, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs, his hands stroking his daughter's wet hair. The scent of river water, usually clean and fresh, now filled Isabella's senses with the unbearable smell of loss. The sun dipped lower, casting long, melancholy shadows across the river. The gentle murmur of the water, which had once been a soothing sound, now seemed to whisper a tragic lament. For Isabella, the world had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The laughter of birds in the olive trees, the warmth of the sun, the very beauty of the landscape, all were overshadowed by the profound, aching emptiness in her arms. The year 570 would forever be marked in her memory, not by the seasons or the harvests, but by the day the Tagus River in its silent, unforgiving embrace, stole her beloved Sophia, leaving her with only the chilling knowledge of a life tragically cut short by a moment of inattention and the ever-present dangers of their world. Number 4. The desert's cruel offering in the Ghassanid kingdom. Layla watched her 2-year-old son Rashid, carefully tracing patterns in the sand with a stick. His dark, earnest eyes, usually so full of mischief, were currently focused with intense concentration. Around them, the tents of their Ghassanid camp, a vibrant tapestry of woven goat hair and intricate patterns, stood resilient against the vast, ochre expanse of the Arabian desert. It was 570, and their tribe, Christian Arabs allied with the Byzantine Empire, moved between the fertile fringes and the arid heartland, their lives dictated by the search for water and pasture. For Layla, a woman of strength and grace, Rashid was the heart of her existence, a precious gift in a land that offered both beauty and brutal challenges. Rashid was a curious and adventurous child, always eager to explore, always seeking out new discoveries among the dunes and wadis. He would spend hours watching the camels, mimicking their low grumbles or attempting to climb the small gnarled trees. Layla, deeply devoted to her son, often carried him on her hip, her gaze sweeping the horizon for any sign of danger. The desert, though their home, was also a place of hidden perils, venomous creatures, treacherous terrain, and the ever-present threat of scarcity. She remembered the stories of children lost to the desert's vastness, or to the swift, silent bite of a viper hidden beneath a rock. Scholars of nomadic life in ancient Arabia confirm that survival was a constant struggle with dangers from wildlife, and the environment being ever-present concerns, particularly for young children. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun beat down with relentless intensity, Rashid was playing a little further from their tent than usual. He had found a fascinating, brightly colored beetle, and was chasing it, his small bare feet kicking up puffs of sand. Layla, busy preparing a meal for her family, had called out to him, "Rashid, stay close. The sun is high." He had waved a small hand in acknowledgement, his focus entirely on the elusive insect. The familiar sounds of the camp, the murmur of voices, the clatter of pots lulled her into a false sense of security. The world felt peaceful, if hot. Suddenly a sharp, piercing shriek tore through the air. It was Rashid. Layla's blood ran cold. She dropped the clay pot she was holding, which shattered at her feet, and ran, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. She saw him only a short distance away, clutching his small leg, his face contorted in agony, a thin stream of blood welling from a tiny, twin-pronged puncture mark on his ankle. Next to him, quickly slithering away into the shade of a rock, was a small, dark shape, a scorpion, its tail raised in a deadly arc. Layla gasped, her worst fear realized. The desert had claimed him. Not with thirst or hunger, but with a silent, swift venom, she scooped him up, her hands trembling, tears blurring her vision. His small body was already convulsing, his skin clammy despite the heat. She cried out for help, and within moments, her family and other women from the camp surrounded them, their faces grim. Her mother, a woman who had lived a lifetime in the desert, quickly applied pressure to the wound, trying to staunch the flow of venom, and produced a small vial of milky white liquid, a traditional antidote made from crushed herbs and camel's milk, hoping against hope. But the speed of the venom was terrifying. Accounts of the time describe scorpions as a common and deadly threat in desert regions, with venomous species capable of killing a small child swiftly if left untreated, or even with rudimentary treatments. Rashid's small body writhed in her arms, his cries turning into choked whimpers, his eyes rolled back and his breathing grew shallow and erratic. Layla rocked him, singing him lullabies, her voice a desperate, broken whisper. She pleaded with God, with every spirit she knew, to spare her child, to reverse the cruel, swift hand of fate. Her husband, Khalil, a strong man who faced desert raiders without fear, was powerless. his face a mask of profound sorrow, his eyes fixed on his son. Hours stretched, though it felt like mere moments, in a suffocating haze of terror and despair. The sun began its slow descent, painting the dunes in hues of orange and purple. But for Layla, the world had turned irrevocably dark. Rashid's convulsions lessened, not a sign of recovery, but of exhaustion. His small body grew heavy, his breath fainter, until it was nothing more than a ghost of a sound. Then, with a final, shallow sigh, he was gone. His small hand, which had been so warm and lively just moments before, went cold and limp. Layla's wail tore through the evening air, a sound of raw, primal agony that silenced the entire camp. She clutched Rashid's lifeless body to her chest, rocking him back and forth, desperate to impart some warmth, some life back into his stillness. The vast, indifferent desert stretched out around them, silent witness to another small life, tragically lost to its hidden dangers. The scent of sand and camel milk, once comforting, now carried the unbearable stench of death. The year 570 would forever mark, in Layla's memory, the day the desert, their home, had made a cruel and sudden offering, stealing her beloved Rashid and leaving her with nothing but the chilling knowledge that even in moments of peace, death could strike with the swiftness of a scorpion's sting. Number 3. The savage raid on the Sasanian border. The sun beat down on the fertile plains near the Sasanian border, illuminating the endless rows of emerald green rice paddies. Zoya, her hands stained with the soil of the earth, hummed softly as she worked. Her 1-year-old daughter, Layla, strapped securely to her back in a woven carrier. Layla, a quiet, observant baby with dark, wide eyes, would often gurgle contentedly, occasionally reaching out a tiny hand to grasp a stray blade of grass. It was 570. At a time when the vast Sasanian Empire, stretching from Mesopotamia to Central Asia, was often embroiled in border skirmishes with its rivals, particularly the Byzantines and various nomadic tribes. For Zoya, a simple farmer whose life revolved around the rhythm of the harvest, Layla was the precious fulfillment of her deepest hopes, a promise of continuity in a world often marked by uncertainty. Layla was a calm, gentle child, content to watch the world from her perch on her mother's back. Zoya would often whisper stories to her about the ancient Persian kings, about the fertile lands they tended, and the blessings of the fire temple. Layla's small presence was a constant comfort, a silent anchor in Zoya's laborious days. Zoya often heard stories from older villagers about the constant threat of raids from nomadic tribes, swift and brutal attacks that could sweep through a village, leaving desolation in their wake. She prayed to Ahura Mazda daily for protection, for peace, for the safety of her family. One clear morning, the familiar sounds of their village, the lowing of cattle, the chatter of women, the distant cries of children at play, were shattered by a sudden, terrifying shriek. A raiding party, fear, cold and immediate, seized Zoya. She looked up, her blood freezing in her veins. On the horizon, a cloud of dust rose, and from it emerged a group of mounted warriors, their cries savage and their crude weapons glinting in the sun. They were likely a nomadic tribe, perhaps Avars or Huns, who often raided the Sasanian frontiers for plunder and slaves. Historical records of this period confirm the constant threat of such incursions on the borders of empires. Panic erupted. Villagers scattered, screaming, running for the meager safety of their homes or the dense thickets nearby. Zoya, clutching Layla to her, ran blindly, her heart pounding with a primal terror. She headed for the river, hoping its winding banks and dense reeds might offer some concealment. She could hear the shouts of the raiders, the terrified screams of her neighbors, the clatter of hooves growing closer. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her legs burning with exertion. Layla, sensing her mother's terror, began to whimper, clutching at Zoya's clothing. As Zoya plunged into a thicket of thorny bushes, trying to reach the river, a fierce, bearded warrior on horseback spotted her. He wheeled his horse, his eyes alight with a predatory gleam, and bore down on her, his spear raised. Zoya screamed, instinctively pulling Layla closer, turning her body to shield her precious daughter. The spear struck not her, but the small body on her back. There was a sickening thud, a single sharp cry from Layla, and then a profound, terrifying stillness. Zoya stumbled, falling to her knees, her body momentarily numb with shock. The warrior, seeing the child, barked something in a harsh tongue, then wheeled his horse away, uninterested in a wounded woman and a dead infant, leaving her in the dust. The raid continued, the screams of the villagers echoing around her. Zoya lay there, her face buried in the dust, trying to comprehend what had just happened. She slowly, fearfully reached around to the carrier on her back. Her fingers touched something wet and warm, blood, her blood mixed with Layla's. She carefully unstrapped the carrier, turning her daughter's small body around. Layla's eyes were open, wide and staring, but utterly lifeless. A small, dark stain spread rapidly across her chest, directly over her heart. The spear had pierced her instantly. Taking her in a single brutal moment, her tiny hand, which had just grasped a blade of grass, was now limp. Zoya let out a raw, guttural scream, a sound of unspeakable agony that rose above the chaos of the raid. She clutched Layla's lifeless body to her chest, rocking her back and forth, desperate to infuse her with breath, with life, with the warmth that had been so cruelly extinguished. The air, thick with the smell of dust and terror, now also carried the coppery tang of fresh blood. The sounds of the raid, the screams and shouts, continued around her. But for Zoya, the world had shrunk to this one horrifying moment, this one unbearable truth. Hours later, when the raiders had finally departed, leaving behind a trail of smoke and devastation, Zoya was found by her husband, Baham, still cradling Layla's body amidst the chaos. His face was a mask of grief and horror as he understood the full extent of their loss. The rice paddies, once green and promising, now seemed to stretch out into an equally desolate future. For Zoya, the brutal, unpredictable violence of 578 had reached into the heart of her life, tearing away her child in a savage moment, leaving her with nothing but the chilling knowledge of the fragility of peace and the profound, aching emptiness of her arms. Number 2, the whispering sands of the Silk Road, the desert wind, a constant companion, rustled the prayer flags strung between the weathered tents. Kaylin, her face etched with the lines of relentless sun and weary travel, watched her 5-year-old son, Arslan, play in the dust with a small, carved wooden horse. Their nomadic tribe, traders who traversed the eastern reaches of the Silk Road, were accustomed to the harsh realities of life in 570, a time when empires were distant concepts and survival was a daily negotiation with the elements. For Kaylin, Arslan was the essence of her future, a sturdy, bright spark in a world that demanded resilience and strength. Arslan was a spirited boy, his laughter echoing across the vast, empty plains. He loved to listen to the tales of distant cities and strange peoples that his father Batu brought back from his caravan journeys. He was already learning to ride a small pony, his balance surprising for his age, and he dreamed of leading his own caravan someday. Kaylin cherished his vitality, his boundless energy, knowing that the desert could be an unforgiving master. She often recalled the stories of sudden desert storms, the kind that could swallow a caravan whole, leaving no trace. Her fears, though usually quiet, were always present. Historical accounts of the Silk Road reveal that travel was fraught with dangers, from bandits to extreme weather conditions, and entire caravans could be lost without a trace. One scorching afternoon, as their caravan rested near a sparse oasis, a sudden ominous change swept across the sky. The air grew still heavy, and the distant horizon turned a menacing shade of bruised purple. Kaylin, her heart sinking, recognized the signs: a sandstorm. Not a gentle breeze, but a monstrous, swirling wall of sand that could bury a man alive. To the tents. Quickly. Batu, his voice urgent, bellowed orders to the other members of their small tribe. They scrambled to secure the tent flaps, to tie down their meager possessions, to prepare for the onslaught. Kalen, clutching Arslan's hand, pulled him towards their tent. He was surprisingly quick, his small legs pumping, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and childlike wonder at the approaching phenomenon. Just as they reached the entrance, the first blast of the storm hit a violent gust of wind carrying stinging sand. It tore at their clothes, blinding them, filling their mouths and noses with grit. Arslan, overwhelmed by the sudden force, stumbled, his hand so tightly clutched in Kalen's, slipped free Arslan. Kalen shrieked. Blinded by the sand, her voice swallowed by the roaring wind, she reached out desperately, her fingers grasping only empty air. The storm, like a monstrous beast, was upon them. The world turned into a swirling vortex of choking sand and deafening wind. She heard a small, muffled cry, then nothing. Panic, cold and consuming, seized her. She fell to her knees, clawing at the impenetrable wall of sand, screaming her son's name, but her voice was lost in the furious roar of the storm. Batu, his face contorted with terror, tried to reach her, to pull her back into the flimsy shelter of their tent, but the sheer force of the wind threatened to tear them both apart. The desert had opened its mouth and swallowed her son. The sandstorm raged for what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps only an hour. When it finally subsided, leaving behind an eerie, heavy silence and a sky washed clean of dust, the landscape was transformed. Dunes had shifted. Familiar landmarks were gone, buried beneath newly formed hills of sand. Kalen, her face raw and bleeding from the abrasive sand, her lungs burning, stumbled out of the tent, her eyes frantically scanning the desolate, altered terrain. Batu and the other tribesmen joined her, their faces etched with grim understanding. They searched for hours, meticulously, desperately, digging through the newly formed dunes with their bare hands, calling Arslan's name until their voices were hoarse. The desert, which had always been their home, now felt like a vast, indifferent tomb. The small wooden horse Arslan had been playing with lay half buried in the sand, a cruel reminder of his sudden disappearance. Accounts of desert storms throughout history speak of their devastating power, capable of burying people and animals, leaving no trace and turning once familiar landscapes into treacherous labyrinths. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, mournful shadows across the newly shaped dunes, hope dwindled to a cold ember. They found nothing, no trace of Arslan. The sheer volume of sand, the way the landscape had been so utterly transformed, made any true search an impossible task. He was simply gone, swallowed by the desert, a cruel offering to the forces of nature in 570. Kalen collapsed onto the sand, her body shaking with silent sobs, her tears quickly absorbed by the thirsty earth. Batu held her his own grief, a heavy, tangible weight. But there was no comfort to be found. The night was cold and silent, broken only by the mournful whisper of the wind across the dunes. For Kalen, the world had lost its light, its warmth. The stars, usually a comforting guide in the desert sky, now seemed to mock her with their indifferent brilliance. The vast, empty expanse of the Silk Road, which had always symbolized adventure and life, now held only the profound, aching emptiness of her lost child. The year 570 would forever be etched in her memory as the year the desert, in its savage, untamed power, swallowed her beloved Arslan, leaving her with nothing but the chilling knowledge that some losses were absolute, final, and without a trace. Number 1. The silence of the Roman road. The relentless Roman road, though ancient, still offered a path through the dense, shadowy forests of what was once Roman Gaul, now a patchwork of Frankish influence and lingering Roman tradition. Aurelia, her sandals dusty, clutched her 3-year-old son Marcus tightly to her side as they walked. He was a sturdy, inquisitive boy, his small hand warm in hers, his bright eyes constantly scanning the tree line. It was 570, at a time of travel for them, as they made their way from a smaller villa to a larger, more established relative's estate, hoping for a safer, more prosperous life. For Aurelia, a young widow whose husband had been lost to a sudden fever the previous year, Marcus was her entire world, her reason for every step forward. Marcus was a lively chatterbox, constantly pointing out birds or unusual stones, or asking endless questions about the journey. He was her joy, her burden, and her hope, all wrapped into one small, energetic package. Aurelia often told him stories of the great Roman Empire, of a time when these roads were safer, more bustling. She knew the dangers of travel in this era: bandits, wild animals, the sheer uncertainty of the wilderness. She kept a vigilant eye on Marcus, her senses heightened by the knowledge that she was his sole protector. Historical accounts of travel in post-Roman Western Europe confirm that roads were dangerous, banditry was common, and the wilderness held many threats. They were a small party: Aurelia, Marcus, and two older trusted servants, remnants of their once larger household. They had been traveling for days, their spirits uplifted by the promise of their destination. The forest, though beautiful, felt increasingly oppressive, its shadows long and deep, its silence broken only by the chirping of unseen insects and the rustle of leaves. Aurelia held Marcus's hand tighter, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. The attack was swift and brutal, erupting from the very shadows of the forest. A band of rough, unkempt men, their faces obscured by hoods, burst from the undergrowth, yelling savagely. They were bandits, the scourge of lonely travelers. Aurelia shrieked, pulling Marcus behind her, trying to shield him with her body. The servants, older men, tried to fight back, but they were quickly overwhelmed. The world dissolved into a chaos of shouts, the clash of crude weapons, and the desperate cries of fear. In the ensuing struggle, a bandit, his eyes wild with malice, shoved Aurelia hard. She stumbled, falling to the ground, her head hitting a root with a sickening thud. The world swam around her, a dizzying kaleidoscope of green leaves and flashing metal. She heard Marcus cry out a sharp, terrified sound. She tried to reach for him, but her limbs felt like lead, her vision blurry. The bandit, seizing the opportunity, grabbed Marcus. He was not interested in the meager coin they carried. His eyes, as Aurelia faintly registered through the fog of her pain, were on the robust, healthy child. Children, especially boys, could be sold into servitude or slavery. The bandit vanished into the dense undergrowth as swiftly as he had appeared, taking Marcus with him. Aurelia struggled to her feet, her head throbbing, her vision clearing only to reveal the horrifying truth. Her servants lay bleeding, groaning softly. Marcus was gone. The silence that followed the bandits' retreat was far more terrifying than the chaos that had preceded. It was a silence filled with the profound, gaping emptiness of his absence. "Marcus!" she screamed, her voice raw, tearing her throat. She ran into the forest, heedless of danger, calling his name again and again, pushing through thorns and tangled vines, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. There was no reply, only the indifferent rustle of the leaves and the mocking chirping of birds. She searched until her legs gave out, until her voice was hoarse and broken, until the sun began to set, painting the forest in hues of despair. Her servants, though wounded, managed to help her back to the road, trying to soothe her with hollow words of comfort, but Aurelia knew. She knew the wilderness was vast, the bandits merciless. The chances of finding him, of ever seeing his bright, inquisitive eyes again, were impossibly small. The thought of her small, terrified son, dragged into an unknown fate, filled her with a despair so profound it threatened to consume her. They continued their journey, a grim, silent procession. Aurelia walked, her body moving mechanically, but her soul was lost, left somewhere in the dark, silent depths of the forest. The Roman road, once a symbol of connection, now felt like a cruel pathway leading her away from her heart. The silence of the forest, once merely peaceful, now held the agonizing echo of her son's last cry, a sound that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her days. For Aurelia, the year 570 would forever be etched in her memory as the year the silence of the Roman road swallowed her beloved Marcus, leaving her with nothing but the chilling knowledge of his stolen life and the profound, aching emptiness that was once her future.